Hello and welcome to this lecture for the Chrysalis Diploma in Counselling Skills and Theory. This is for Component 3, Foundations of Counselling and Theory, Part 3, the Cognitive Behavioural Approach, and this is Module 3. You can find the standards to be met by this particular component outlined in Moodle and in your written course materials. Today I will share some slides with you throughout this lecture, and you will also be able to download these from Moodle if you wish. Do please note any questions that you might have as you're watching this lecture and take these to class to discuss with your class tutor. Okay, so we're going to get on to CBT first, and this is really a really short history, and there's more about this in your notes. So behaviourism really developed in direct opposition to the psychoanalytic approach that we've looked at previously. When you think about Freud, for example, he used his own clients for his study and research. So in effect, it was anecdotal evidence. Now that's not to minimise in any way the huge contribution and achievements that Freud made to the world of therapy. But in terms of evidence, there's not a huge amount of evidence there. So the behaviourists wanted something that they could regard as a strong evidential base and a strong base for further research. And the behaviourist approach considers behaviour as something which can be learnt, and also because behaviour is observable, it can be studied and measured and researched. So when we think about behaviourists, we're thinking about people like Pavlov, who developed the theory of classical conditioning. We're thinking about people like Skinner, who developed the theory of operant conditioning. And we're thinking about those types of notions where you're linking stimuli to responses, and you're linking behaviour to consequences, so behaviour to rewards or conversely to punishments. So you're thinking about all that kind of work, and there's a little bit of a description of that work in the notes, but it is worth going into a little bit more as well because it's really interesting. So all of this work was going on, and then in the 50s, the notion of perception was added to that mix. So cognition suddenly was added to the behavioural mix, because perception is all important. If you think about a situation where a certain behaviour is thought to elicit, or a certain behaviour is thought to elicit a certain reward, for example, that only works if the way you perceive that reward is something positive. So, for example, if you're told that the way that you behave will result in you getting a chocolate bar, that only works if a chocolate bar is something that you like. If you don't like chocolate, it's not going to work. So perception is all important, and that was a really key move in the development of cognitive behavioural therapy. So suddenly perception is being studied as well and added to behaviour. But the 1970s were really important in the creation of the CBT model as we now know it. That was when Aaron Beck developed CBT alongside but separate from other theories such as Ellis's rational emotive behavioural therapy, which you will learn about in year 3. There are lots and lots of variations within the cognitive behavioural approach. As I said earlier, it's an umbrella term. It doesn't just refer to one theory or one approach. But we're going to look at Beck's CBT today because that's the approach that we think of when we think of CBT. That's a really important approach. Okay, so there are various assumptions which underpin Beck's CBT model. And I'm going to read these out from your PowerPoint. So the person is an active agent who interacts with his or her world. 2, interactions take place through evaluations he or she makes about his or her environment. And 3, the results of these interpretations and evaluations are thoughts and images. And because we are consciously aware of them, or can become consciously aware of them, there's potential to change. So in effect, we learn behaviour, and if we can learn one way of behaving, the idea is that we can learn another way of behaving, a better way, a more positive way that makes us feel better. So these assumptions really underpin all of the CBT model. And CBT is considered to be a here or now approach, but actually that's not strictly true, because all of these evaluations that are mentioned in point 2, all of these evaluations, all of these interpretations come from somewhere. All of our evaluations have a history to them, for example. So all the experiences that you've had in your life, all of the values and beliefs that you've learned from your parents, that you've learned culturally, that you've learned from the social environment that you've been brought up in, all of those are going to create those evaluations and those perceptions. Otherwise, all our perceptions would be exactly the same. So those experiences and values and beliefs and goals help to create what we call our personal domain. And this personal domain that we all have leads us to making assumptions about the world around us. These assumptions or core beliefs are called schemas. So there's a really good example here, and we'll go through it, but I'm going to just read it out first. So the schema is, I'm unworthy of love. So then the trigger would be that you meet a new partner, you meet a new boyfriend or girlfriend. The negative thought based on that schema, because remember the schema is underlying all of this, is that, well, he'll leave me eventually because I'm unworthy of love. The emotions that come into play there are going to be emotions, negative emotions like anxiety, like resentment, like insecurity, all of these negative emotions, which are going to result in clingy, over-the-top, accusatory behaviour. Now, when you behave like that, chances are that's going to impact this new relationship really negatively. Of course it will. And actually, taking this to the nth degree, this kind of behaviour will probably result in the fact that the boyfriend will leave you. So you've, in effect, reinforced this negative belief. You've reinforced these negative thoughts. And you can see how this sort of negative cycle happens. Now, why might you have that schema in the first place? I'm unworthy of love. Well, looking back to our past experiences, the way that we were treated as a child, the way that people talk to us in our childhood, all of these things can create that kind of schema. If you think about your own childhood, for example, think about your core beliefs now, the thoughts that you have, the automatic thoughts, the automatic feelings that you get. All of these are related to our childhood. So although this is often regarded as a here and now type of approach, it's not completely. And you can see already in a pluralistic approach that we take with our clients and volunteers, that actually when we're looking into our backgrounds, and taking perhaps what we might consider to be a more psychoanalytic approach, a lot of these schemas are going to become relevant. And so you could, for example, when working with a volunteer, take a psychoanalytical approach, explore someone's past, explore someone's relationship in the past, and then later on in the therapy, bring it into the here and now and use some CBT tools, because you're going to have explored the root cause of these schemas, of these beliefs. So you can start to see when you learn about the various approaches, how they can fit in with each other. So in Aaron's CBT, he proposes that distress, emotional distress, anxiety, depression, and so on, is the result of faulty thinking or cognitive distortions or faulty information processing. Now, these are the words that he used. Sometimes with volunteers or clients, it's not so useful to use the terms faulty thinking because faulty has a bit of a negative connotation to it, but unhelpful thinking patterns, cognitive distortions is a good way to put it. So these fall into various common categories. So arbitrary inference. I'll never make anything of myself. I'll never achieve anything. You know, just basically drawing a conclusion in the absence of any evidence for that conclusion. So it might be that you've decided that you'll never make anything of yourself and you never achieve anything. So you're definitely going to fail your driving test, for example, or you're definitely going to fail an exam, for example. And that can just spiral again into those, you know, that's the thought, so the emotions, feeling very secure, feeling very bad about yourself. And chances are you won't go and take that test, or you won't go and take that exam. So you will, in effect, fail it. And again, you're reinforcing that thought, that cognitive distortion. The second one is selective abstraction. And selective abstraction is when you focus on one detail, but you make a judgment about the whole experience based on one single event. So my 5-year-old has hit another child. He's a bully. Well, actually, he's hit one other child. Maybe shouldn't have done that, but he's not necessarily a bully. And going on further from that, extrapolating that further, he's a bully, so I must be a bad parent. Maybe you can extrapolate that even further. I'm a bad parent. I don't know what I'm doing. Maybe I'm a bad person. 3, overgeneralization. Any strange situation should be regarded as dangerous. I mean, this is immediately a sort of anxious thought, isn't it? But other examples might be, so I've had one bad relationship, so I'm going to hate all men or all women. So taking one situation and just, you know, describing every situation you could possibly encounter in exactly the same way. Magnification and minimization. I got a B for my homework. I'm a complete failure. Personalization. If I don't do my ritual, something terrible will happen to my family. So linking potential bad situations to yourself. This is obviously, this example is obviously an OCD type example, whereby, you know, you feel compelled to do something or something will happen. And there is no evidence for that. It's just a thought. And lastly, absolute dichotomous thinking. In layman's terms, black or white thinking. I must never make a mistake. Actually, what will happen if you do make a mistake? Not a lot. But when you think in terms of black and white thinking, it's all or nothing thinking. Everything feels, one bad thing feels absolutely catastrophic. Okay, so the first thing that you need to ask volunteers or clients to do is to identify their automatic thoughts and their distorted thinking. So one way to do this, a really good way to do this, is to use a thought record sheet. You can ask them to do it in the week between sessions, for example, but it's always good to go over things before you give them out to clients, especially anxious clients, because they'll be worried about doing it wrong. So I'm going to go through this one with you right now. So, so this thought record sheet, for example, looks at events or situations. So the event or the situation may be I'm preparing for an exam, I'm revising, for example. The automatic thought, I'll never know this, I can't do it, I'm useless, I'm a failure, I know that I'll panic and I'll have to walk out crying. So those are the thoughts that, you know, if you're a particularly anxious person, you might have while you're revising, or while you're preparing for the exam, or even while you're thinking about the exam. And of course, the likely outcome here is you're panicking, you can't focus on revising for the exam, your stress and anxiety are through the roof, and actually in extreme cases you might even avoid that exam on the day and then end up feeling a failure, which of course has reinforced everything you said about yourself in the first place when you said I am a failure. Now, other record sheets, this is one type of record sheet, but other record sheets might also have a column for feelings in there. But you can encourage your clients and volunteers to think about things in a more rational way. So thinking about things in a more rational way is about asking questions like, what other interpretations could you make of this event? What evidence do you have for these automatic thoughts that you're having? Are these automatic thoughts factual? Are these automatic thoughts simply your opinion? Because we often think that our thoughts are fact, but most of the time our thoughts are our opinions, and everybody's thoughts are completely different. If our thoughts weren't opinions, everybody would think in exactly the same way. So doing a fact check on it is really good. And once you've had that discussion with clients or volunteers and you've asked those sorts of questions, you know, they might say, well, actually, no, they're not really based on anything. Or they might say, oh, it's based on one time that I failed an exam. And well, we tend to remember the negative times, don't we? But that one time that you failed an exam, actually, what about the 5 times that you passed an exam? So on a basis of probability then, actually, you're going to do really well in this exam. You've got a good chance in this exam. So when you've asked those sorts of questions and got your client or volunteer to really start thinking about different thoughts, different rational ways of looking at something, you can look at what the new thoughts could be. So looking at our thought record sheet, for example, okay, I don't know if I can do this yet, because it's not guaranteed, is it, either way. I need to break down these tasks. I need to concentrate because that will give me the best chance of doing well. It's okay to feel nervous. Everybody feels nervous in exams. And I do already know probably more than I think I do. And actually, the more I calm down and revise, the more I will know. And when you approach an exam or a test with that kind of rational attitude, the new likely outcome is that you're going to be able to focus more. You're going to be able to problem solve better. You may be going to be able to calmly make a proper plan for revision. You're going to be able to take the exam feel some nerves, but you're going to be able to keep going. You're going to be able to do okay, and you're going to feel better about taking that exam. Now, the first time that your volunteer fills one of these out, good to do it with you. But actually, these can be something that they do in between sessions as well. So once they've got the idea of actually using those questions independently, doing a fact check, in effect, on their thoughts, looking at things rationally, they can do this themselves. And there is a lot of work, a lot of tasks that CBT does require clients and volunteers to do between sessions. So that's one of the things that you need to ask when you're thinking, is a CBT type approach useful for this particular volunteer? It's a very proactive approach. So some volunteers really want to take a massively proactive approach. They want to participate in their own therapy, and those sorts of clients and volunteers are brilliant for CBT, because you will be asking people to be doing tasks in between your sessions. Changing your automatic thoughts from negative to more rational is not a process that happens like that. It takes a lot of practice. If you think about automatic thoughts and where they come from, they've been built up from experiences, from learning, from probably a lot of years of thinking like this, a lot of years from absorbing experiences to create that personal domain. So although the idea is if you can learn it, you can unlearn it, or if you've learned a negative way, you can learn a positive way or a more rational way, think about how long it's taken to learn that negative pattern of thinking. So it's not going to happen in an instant. It needs to be practiced. And so clients and volunteers really need to be on board with that and really proactive about it. And that's what you need to think about when you're deciding to use this kind of approach. Will my volunteer really engage with this? Will they really participate with this between sessions? It's really important to think about that. And I tend not to use the word homework when I give tasks between sessions, because I think homework has a bit of a negative connotation for some people, especially people who didn't like school. So I tend to use the word task. But there's other tasks or tools that can be used in CBT. We're just looking at one today. You can do activity scheduling with them, for example. When you have clients with low mood, for example, they find life quite difficult if things aren't quite structured. So you can structure in certain activities. You can ask them to try certain activities and rate them with mastery or pleasure ratings. You can ask them to do certain behavioural tasks, which will contribute to their overall goal. And you can split those tasks down into really small achievable steps for them. You can also, and this is a really good idea, talk to them about the positive resources that they have. We talk a lot in therapy about negative things, but actually you need to remind your volunteers about the resources they have, and these can be personal resources, inner strength, can be resources which you know are from other people, so the support that you have. You can go through strategies and tools with them, which are strategies to help them cope with things. So remember to balance your therapy, because when you're dealing with people who are anxious, when you're dealing with asking them to do certain tasks, they may have to go through a certain amount of discomfort. So these coping strategies are really important to help them to do that. Okay, so we're going to go on to case formulation and assessment. These are an essential part of the pluralistic approach because they provide a framework for the therapeutic process. Basically, you need to think about what you're going to be doing in each session, have some idea about how you're going to work towards achieving a volunteer's goal. And the way that we do this is by assessment and by case formulation. So when we talk about assessment, we're basically talking about a process of information gathering. And this information gathering enables the therapist to arrive at appropriate decisions regarding the therapy for that client or volunteer. So those decisions will include the suitability of clients for therapy, the focus or goals of that therapy, and what the most appropriate approaches would be to take. And this is totally collaborative. It's underpinned by the core conditions and the use of active listening from the person-centered approach that we've talked about, that person-centered foundation of all our work. Now, when you're thinking about suitability of clients for therapy or volunteers for therapy in year 2, there are particular things that you need to think about because there are particular contraindications for you in year 2. So, for example, you're not allowed to work with volunteers who have a history of diagnosed depression. You're not allowed to work with volunteers who have a history of psychosis. You're not allowed to work with under 18s, and you're not allowed to work with adults who can't give informed consent for their therapy. And these restrictions are placed on you for a number of reasons. It's for your safety as much as the volunteer's safety. Obviously, in year 2, there's a limit to your knowledge base and a limit to your experience. So please remember that. If when you're doing your contracting, your assessment with a client, somebody says, or with a volunteer, sorry, somebody says they have a history of a certain medical condition, or they have a certain medical condition at the moment, or they're on certain medication, and you're really not sure about it, always check with your tutor. That's always the best thing to do. So that's assessment, and we do that in the initial consultation. And case formulation is a process of making sense of that information. So basically making some sort of plan. And when you make a plan, you consider factors which may facilitate or hinder progress and growth as well. Okay, so we're going to go on to contracting with clients and gathering information. There's more information in the module about this. So the contract is a mutual agreement between a therapist and client. It can be verbal, but it really should be a proper written contract. And when I say written, typed out, it needs to look professional. It's the first part of your contact with your volunteer at this stage, or client going forward. So you're setting your store out, as a professional. It should be written and signed by, so it should be written, but it should be signed by both parties because you are both agreeing to it. And it covers essential personal details, but it also covers some other really important aspects of your work together. And I'm going to go through those, but I'm not going to give you an exhaustive list, but I'm going to go through the main ones right now. So the client details. So you need the name and contact details of your client. It would be a good idea as well to ask for the best form of contact, so that you're not emailing somebody on an email address that they've given you that they never check. So ask for the best form of contact. They may say, "I'd really prefer if you didn't, unless it's urgent. I'd really prefer that you didn't phone me." They might have a job like ours where it's difficult to answer the phone. So they might say, "I'd rather, I check my email every day. I'd rather you did that, please." So check which the best one is. It's also really important to check whether you can leave a message, particularly if they've given you a landline phone number. They might not have told their partner or their family that they're having therapy. They might not want to tell their partner or their family, and that's their choice. So we don't want to make that choice for them by leaving a message which everyone can hear. You need to ask as well the name and contact details of their GP. You might need to contact their GP, you probably won't, and you can explain this to them. But there may be certain circumstances, for example, if you're worried that they've disclosed some suicidal ideation and you're seriously worried, you might have to get in touch with their GP. That shouldn't happen for a Year 2 student, but it's something that you need to have just on the off chance, in case of emergency. You also need to ask about any medical conditions they have at the moment, but also a history of any serious medical conditions, because you need to remember those contraindications for Year 2 that we've gone over already. And you need to know what medication they're on, and you need to have this so that you can check that medication out. Other important aspects include confidentiality and exceptions, GDPR, general terms and conditions, and what the client can expect in therapy. These are really important. So firstly, confidentiality. As a volunteer, you would expect that your conversations with your therapist would be confidential. And they are, but there are some important exceptions, and you need to make your volunteer aware of this so it doesn't come as a shock to them if you have to break confidentiality. So exceptions to the confidentiality rule, for example, would be if you're concerned about suicide. Again, this shouldn't happen in Year 2, but we're working with human beings. We can't be 100% clear on that. If this did happen, you would have to break confidentiality. Now, there is a Chrysalis course and video all about suicide awareness for students, and I suggest that before you start working with volunteers, you watch that video, because it's got some important information in. You would need to contact your student as well, your tutor as well. But please watch that video because it's got a lot of information in it. Another exception to the confidentiality rule might be if your notes are requested by a court order. You'd have no choice but comply with that. And for this reason, we suggest that you keep your notes quite factual, quite brief. They're there as a reminder for you. If your notes were ever requested by a court, it would be better to have brief notes, so you're not breaking confidentiality as too much, I guess, is the rule. So GDPR. Now, you've probably heard about GDPR, but it is a legal stipulation that you have to have a statement regarding GDPR, and GDPR is all about how you keep personal data. So it's about how you keep it, where you keep it, and for how long. So you need to be quite clear with your with your volunteers, where you are going to keep your information. It should be kept in a locked filing cabinet, for example, where nobody else has access to it. So an area where you are the key holder and only you can access that. And you can think too about anonymizing your notes as well. Legally, the law states that you need a separate signature from your volunteer so they agree with where you keep their data. So on your contract or agreement, on your area or your GDPR statement, you need a space for them to sign that they're happy with your data collection and they're happy with your arrangements, basically. So you will also need some general terms and conditions. You need to think about, for example, what you're going to do if someone doesn't turn up. You're not going to charge, of course, for your therapy. So you can't charge somebody the session fee if they don't turn up, because there are no session fees. But just arrangements for contacts between sessions would be good here. What you're going to do, how you're going to contact somebody, if you'll contact somebody if they don't turn up. Just general arrangements really for therapy. You might want to cover a statement about what you're going to do if you see somebody out and about in the street during your therapy. It wouldn't be wise, for example, if you saw somebody in the street who was having therapy with you as your volunteer or client, and you started having a conversation with them about their therapy. It might not be that, if you see somebody in the street, they would even want to acknowledge you, because they might be with somebody else, or even if they're on their own. That's a part of their life that they perhaps don't want intruding on the rest of their life. It's a good idea to say that when you see somebody out and about, you won't make that first acknowledgement. And if they acknowledge you, you'll say hello, but you're not going to do that first, because that cuts down on anxiety for volunteers who think that you might start talking about therapy in front of other people. So you might want to cover as well what the client can expect in therapy. So for example, it might have something along the lines of that you're hoping to review your therapy every so often. You're going to use a variety of tools that suit you both. You're going to, the expected duration of therapy might be a certain amount of weeks. So just what they can expect from you and what you expect from them. So a statement regarding commitment from you and what you expect back from them might be a good addition to your agreement. You will need to make it clear on your form that you're not charging your volunteers. This is quite important, especially for your case studies. Please don't make your contract a sort of mock-up of a contract that you'll use when you are actually charging people. You're asking your volunteers to sign something, so everything that you ask them to sign must be true. You're not charging them, so please make that clear that you're not charging them. There's lots of things that you can add to your agreement. You might want to add some more things than the list I've gone through. One point though, clients can be and volunteers can be put off by a huge contract or a huge agreement. So whilst you need to be very thorough, whilst you need to be detailed, and whilst you need to have all the important information, please don't make your contract or agreement so huge that it's just unwieldy and it really puts clients off, because when you're presenting your contract, it's in that first initial consultation when you're also developing rapport. So it's actually quite a skill to be able to go through a contract, a legal document, with somebody and still develop rapport, still have some conversation, some good eye contact, some active listening during that process. And it is a skill. It's a skill that you will need to practice. So I suggest that when you've made your contract, have a look at them together with your peer group, with the students that are on your course. Have a look at each other's contracts. And remember, we're not in competition here, so you know, share good practice. Have a go at presenting your contract with a fellow student as if it was with a volunteer, and make sure you feel completely comfortable about presenting that contract, about going through it, about developing rapport at the same time. Make sure you're absolutely comfortable with it. Make any changes that you need to, or any additions, before you use it with a volunteer. We've come to the end of our PowerPoint. Oh, we've not come to the end of our PowerPoint. I've got one more thing to go through. I apologise. Now, this is really useful, actually. So this is a time map, and this is going to help you with case formulation. So on this time map, basically what we're looking at is somebody's life from birth to now, but also future. And it's a visual representation of their experiences up to now, basically. Now, this one is quite a general one. So we've looked at major events really on this one. So we've started with the death of father, which has led to the mother's breakdown, which has led to moving every few years, which has led to feeling like a stranger at school, not feeling that they've ever fitted in, not feeling that they've made really close relationships, and feeling that they can't ask people for help. Maybe feeling like because dad's not around, mum's had a breakdown, there's really nobody who has been helping. And so you can see as this timeline progresses, you can see how these negative thoughts have been kind of set up and established, for example. And you can see how this has impacted. But there's lots of good things in there as well, and there's some hopes and dreams for the future. Now, this can be a really good way at kind of conceptualizing issues, looking at reoccurring patterns throughout life, looking from a CBT approach at how core beliefs, how those schemas are set up, and how they actually impact the way that life has progressed. And they can provide a really good starting point for therapy. But actually, you can create timelines in your own way. This is a very general one. This is a really good place to start. But you could do a more specific one that just looks at relationships. And the great thing about a timeline map is that it's something that can be brought out at every session if you want to, and it can just be out there and you can add to it. It's a really good way to conceptualize the work that you're doing with clients. And it can be a really positive thing as well, because hopefully more good things are happening as therapy progresses. So yeah, it's a good thing to do when you're thinking about case formulation. Okay, so that is the end of our PowerPoint now. So I hope you've enjoyed this lesson. I hope I've been able to explain some of the information that we've seen. Have a think of if you've got any questions for your tutor when you meet up. Practice some of the contracting writing skills that I've that I've talked about. And also you can discuss the CBT approach with your peer group as well, and whether you think it's something that you could use with your volunteers, whether you think that evidence base is important, how it fits in with the other two approaches that we've talked about previously. And good luck.